This is the third part in the 4-part series where you learn to solve the Rubik's Cube blindfolded. In part 1 and 2, you learn how to turn any scramble into a story that you can remember. If you haven't watched part 1 and 2 yet, then go back and watch those, and then move on to this tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll learn execution, so the actual moves we are going to do to solve the cube. So, we will need to learn some algorithms, then swapping and setups for edges and corners, and then parity. So by the end of the video, you'll be able to fully memorize and solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. So let's get going. You now know how to turn a scrambled cube into a story that you can remember. So now it's time to use these letters to make all those swaps needed to solve the cube. This step of the solve, when you are actually solving the cube, is called the execution. So step number 7 of the full solve, the first step of execution, is to learn the algorithms needed. You are only going to have to learn 3 algorithms in order to be able to swap the pieces we need to solve the cube. And you may already know some of these algorithms as they are commonly used in normal 3x3 solving. The first of the 3 algorithms is a T-perm, which is this algorithm. We will be using the fact that it swaps these 2 edges in order to solve our edges. The second algorithm is a modified Y-perm without the F move at the start, which is this algorithm. And we will be using the fact that it swaps this corner and this corner in order to solve our corners. And the last algorithm that we'll need to learn is called an R-perm, which is our parity algorithm. So remember when we had one letter without a pair at the end of our memorization sometimes? Well, we are going to use this algorithm to help fix that. So let's learn some algorithms. But before you skip ahead, if you already know these, just pay some careful attention to the Y-perm, which is slightly modified. And before we dive into the nitty-gritty of learning the algorithms, here are a few helpful suggestions to help you in learning the algorithms. And these work for any algorithms, but will also be helpful here. So first of all, if you've somehow gotten to this point in the tutorial and don't know what these letters mean, they are cube notation, and you can learn it from this tutorial that I made. Secondly, it's easiest to learn some of these longer algorithms in smaller groupings, which are denoted by the brackets above. And breaking bigger algorithms up into smaller chunks really helps our brain in remembering things. And lastly, as I show the algorithms, I will be using certain finger tricks, which are the particular ways my fingers do the moves. And these will help make doing the algorithm as smooth and as easy as possible. Even though it seems like more to learn, learning the finger tricks of an algorithm is quite easy and will actually help in remembering the algorithm. If your fingers are in the right spot, then the next move in the algorithm will feel quite natural, helping you do the algorithm. And to solve blindfolded, we'll be doing the algorithms quite a bit, so making them as easy as possible to execute is quite important. Alright, so now it's finally time to learn some algorithms. I will show you the algorithms using the good finger tricks, and the algorithm will also be at the top of the screen, broken up into chunks that make it easier to remember. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to pay attention to the way my fingers do the moves, and you should try and copy it. So first of all, a T-perm. And secondly is that modified Y-perm, which goes like this. And lastly is the R-perm for solving parity, which goes like this. If you already know how to do an R-perm from regular 3x3 solving using a different algorithm, then you can use that one too, as long as it does the same thing as this algorithm where it swaps these 2 corners and these 2 edges. So give it a crack learning and remembering the moves of these algorithms, and then come back to do some more practicing with me afterwards. This could take you a couple minutes, a couple hours, or it could take a couple days. But it doesn't matter how long it takes you to learn the algorithms, just that you are confident enough to be able to do them by memory. Awesome, so now that you know those algorithms well enough to slowly do the moves, it's time to really practice down these algorithms and get them into your muscle memory. And the best way to do this is to do the algorithm a whole heap using the correct finger tricks. You might have noticed while you were learning the algorithm that after doing the algorithm twice, the cube goes back to solved. So if I do a t-perm once, and then I do a t-perm again, then the cube goes back to being solved. And this means that you can check that you did the algorithm right. If you do everything right, then after doing the algorithm twice, then the cube should go back to solved. So just keep on doing the algorithms again and again with the correct finger tricks until you are comfortable enough to be able to do them without looking. It is very important that you can do them without looking and without messing up, as they will be used a lot to solve the cube. So now it's time to use those algorithms that we learnt to actually solve the cube. And so we are first going to learn how to do this using the edges. Look at what the t-perm algorithm that we learnt does. It swaps these two edges, and as a byproduct it also swaps these two corners, but we don't need to worry about the corners for now. Remember back to the car seat analogy where everybody was in the wrong spots, and so they all swapped to the driver's seat to get back to where they should be, one at a time? And remember how our buffer is like the driver's seat. So we are going to use this t-perm algorithm to swap this piece, our buffer, or like the driver's seat in the car analogy, with this piece, which we call our target location. So now that we have an understanding of what the algorithm we just learnt does, and how it's useful, it's time to solve the cube. The list of letters that we memorized earlier on in the solve give us instructions for how to set up each of the swaps that we need to do. So think of our buffer like a bow that's sort of fixed in place, and it can only shoot to right here, which is the target position. And each letter that we memorized, like in this case I would have the letter L memorized, we are going to be doing some setup moves to set up the target to that target position. And then we can do that t-perm to swap our buffer, or like the driver's seat in the car analogy, with the target position. And then we can undo the move that we did to set up our target to the target position. So we did an L prime, and so now we're going to do an L. And that solved that piece by swapping our buffer with the place that it needed to go. So altogether, in order to swap our buffer with the place that it needs to go to, like in this case, the piece of the buffer needs to go to U, then you do some setup moves to set up the target here to the target position. So in this case, we could do D prime and L2 to bring it up to here. And then secondly, you perform the swapping algorithm, which is the t-perm, which is like shooting the buffer, shooting the bow over to the target position. And then you undo the setup moves you did at the start. So we did a D prime L2, so now I'll do an L2 D. And that swapped our buffer with the target, which solved this piece. And these moves that we do to set up the target to the target position are called, you could probably guess, setup moves. And one super important thing to know for this step is that when you are doing the setup moves, never ever do a move that affects these three pieces. So this corner, this edge, or this corner. And so that means that you can't do any U moves because that affects those three pieces. You can't do any F moves because that affects this corner. You can't do any R moves because that affects those pieces. And you can't do any B moves because that affects this corner back here. And while it is best to try and figure out the setup moves by yourself, if you are stuck or want to find the best way to set up a particular letter, there will be a list of all the best setup moves down in the description. Just make sure that when you're setting up a target to the target position, you don't do a move that affects these three pieces. So I know that was quite a lot, but now we're going to look at an example of this in action. So go ahead and do this scramble to your cube so you can follow along. So like we learned in some of the previous steps, if you trace through from your buffer around and in order to memorize the cube, then you would get S, D, N, L. So let's have a crack at actually solving these edges. So first of all, we have the letter S, which is back here, and we have to get this sticker here, which is our target, up to here, the target position, so that we can do that swap of our buffer with the target position. And this one is quite a tough one without affecting these pieces, but the best way to do it is to do a wide L prime like this. And what that does is it brings the piece that's back here, right here, and it brings it to here now. And then what we can do from there is we can do a D prime to bring it to here, and then we can do an L2. And so disregarding the centers and stuff because they don't matter for now, but these three pieces, we didn't affect them, so all good. And now the piece that was back here at S is now right here, ready to be swapped with. So let's go ahead and do the swapping algorithm. Awesome. And now we have to undo the setup moves that we did at the start. So in order to set up S to our target location, we did an fat L prime, D prime, L2. And so the reverse of that is going to be L2 to bring it to here, and then D to bring it back to here, and then fat L. And what that did is it solved that piece. Good job. And so now next in our string of letters was D, and that is right here. And you might have noticed that that is already in our target location. So our target is already at the target location, which means we can just go ahead and do the swapping algorithm. So if we do that T-perm, then it just solved that piece, and happy days. So D is quite an easy case. For edges, we can just go ahead and do the algorithm because it's already set up. And so next in our string of letters was N, which is right here. And so what we can do to set this one up, it's quite difficult without affecting these three pieces along here, this corner, this edge, and this corner. But what we can do is we can do a wide D move like this. And so what that does to this edge, if we do a wide D, it brings it to back here. And then once it's back here, then we can do an L, and now it's in our target location. So I'll show you that once more time. So we're trying to get this location up to the target location. And so what we can do is a wide D to bring it here, and then an L to bring it right to here. And then once we do the swapping algorithm, and then we have to undo the setup moves that we did. So because we did a wide D and then an L, now we do an L prime and a wide D prime. And that solves that piece. And so now last in our string of letters was L. And so we need to swap our buffer piece with the letter L. And since our buffer is like a bow that's fixed in place and it can only shoot to right here at the target location, then we need to set up L to the target location. So we can do an L prime for that, which brings it to here. And then we can do the swapping algorithm. And then we can undo that setup move we did at the start. And that solved all those edges. So, good job. Now I reckon you're ready to go into a practice of solving the edges with your eyes still open. I'll give you the scramble and the trace to letters. So all you have to do is do what we just did together. Look at what letter is next in the string of letters, and then set that up to the target location. Then do the swapping algorithm, a T-perm, then do the exact reverse of the setup moves you did. Then repeat the same for the next letter, then the next, and so on until you're done. I'll give you 3 scrambles to practice on, so good luck. Unpause the video once you've finished each scramble. Awesome, so hopefully you were able to follow those letters to solve the edges, and so now we can move on to doing the same thing but for corners. Alright, so in the last step we learned how to set up and then do the swapping algorithm and then unset up in order to solve our edges. So now we are going to take the exact same principle and apply it to corners. However, instead of our bow being this piece, it instead just our corner buffer, which is back here, on the top of this like back left corner, and the target position, which is the place that we have to set up our targets to, is right here. And that's because our corners swapping algorithm, the modified Y-perm, which goes like this, swaps our buffer with right here. So the bow can only shoot to here this time, this target position. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up our target to the target position, perform the swapping algorithm, and then undo that setup, just like we did in edges. But just like with edges, there are some special pieces that you should never mess up when doing the setup moves. So for edges, it was these three, but for corners, it's these three pieces back here. So this edge, this corner, and this edge. And so your setup moves should never affect these pieces. And so that means that the only moves you can do for setup moves are R moves, F moves, and D moves. Because if you did a U move, then it would affect these three pieces. If you did an L move, then it would affect the pieces. And if you did like a B move, then it would affect those pieces as well. So we can't use those moves in setups. So you just need to make sure that your setup moves are not damaging these three pieces for corners. And just like with edges, it is best to try and come up with the setup moves yourself. But if you're struggling for one, or you want to find the best way to do it, then there will be a list of the best setup moves in the description. Alright, so I'll quickly go through an example now, and then you can do some practices. Remembering it just follows the same principles as with edges. A setup, and then the swapping algorithm, and then undo the setup. So just go ahead and do this scramble to your cube so you can follow along. Alright, so this is the scramble that we have, and if we trace through like we learnt back in memorization, then we would get the memorization K, B, C, G, F, and H. So in order to solve the pieces, we're going to be swapping our buffer, which is this top piece back here, with this target position right here. And so we have to set up our targets, which is the letters that we have, to our target position right here. And so for this first target, which is K, which is right here, so we have to set up this sticker here to here. And so the best way to do that is going to be doing a D move, and that brings it to here, and then an R move, which brings it to here. And those moves, they never affected these three pieces because the D doesn't affect those three pieces, and then the R to bring it here doesn't affect those three pieces, so it's all good. And then we do the swapping algorithm, which is that modified Y-perm, and it's like shooting this bow to our target position right here. And then we undo the setup moves that we did. So since we did DR, we do R prime and D prime, and that solved K. And then next we have B, the next letter in our string is B. And so how we're going to set that up to our target position is we can do an R, and that doesn't affect these three pieces, and it brings the piece that was here at B down to here. And then we can do a D prime, and that brings it into our target position here, which means that after we do the swapping algorithm, and then we undo the setup moves that we did, which were, remember, R, D prime, so now we can do D, R prime, and that solved B. And so next in our string of letters is going to be C, and that's right here. And so in order to bring C down to our target position, we're going to do an F right here. And that doesn't affect these three pieces either. And then we can do our swapping algorithm, which is that modified Y-perm. And then we undo the setup move that we did. And so since we did an F, we're going to do now an F prime. And that solved C. And then in our memorization, we had G next, which is right here. And so how we're going to set that up to our target position is we're going to do a D2, and so that brings this here over to right here, and then we're going to do an R, and so that puts that into our target position. And then when we do the swapping algorithm, and then we need to undo our setup moves, which since we did D2 and then R, they're now R prime D2, and that solved G. And so the next letter in our memorization, or our next target, is going to be F right here. And so how we're going to set up F, our target, to our target position is we're going to do an F2, and that puts it right there. And then we do our swapping algorithm, and then we undo the F2 by doing another F2. And then finally our last target is H. And so how we're going to set up our H over to our target position, we're going to do a D2. And so that brings it all the way around to our target position. And then once we do the swapping algorithm, and we undo the D2 that we did with another D2, then that solves all of our corners, easy as. Alright, and now that we've done that together, I reckon you can do some practices now. So just like with edges, I'll give you the scramble and the letters, and you can one at a time swap the buffer with each letter by setting that letter up to the swapping position, doing the swapping algorithm, and then undoing the setup without damaging these three pieces. Unpause the video once you are done each scramble, and good luck! Awesome, so very soon we'll get into some examples and practices of the full execution, and then very soon after that a full solve, which is very exciting. But first, there's just one more thing I have to tell you about. Remember how sometimes you have just a single letter at the end of your memorization? Well, this is called parity, and there's something we have to do during execution whenever we get that single letter at the end of the memorization for both edges and corners. Because if you have that single letter at the end of edges, then it'll also be that single letter at the end of corners. And if you don't have any single letters for edges, then you won't have one for corners, and vice versa. So it's a good way to check that you got the memorization correct. Because if one of them has a single letter and one of them doesn't, then you know that something went wrong and you can try and redo your memorization. But either way, when you get that single letter, you just solve the edges like normal first, and then you do that third algorithm we learned, the R-perm, before solving the corners. I'm not going to explain why we have to do this algorithm when we have an odd number of letters, because it isn't really important for you to know right now, but you might be able to figure it out. So remember, the algorithm looks like this. And it's very important you do that U prime at the end there. It's very easy to forget, but very important you do. So now I'll go through a full example of the execution, so actually solving both the edges and the corners and doing a parity algorithm if it's needed. So go ahead and do this scramble on your cube to follow along. Alright, so obviously we start off by getting the white on the top and the green on the front. And since this is just for the execution, I've already done the memorization for the cube, and these are the letters. And in a solve, we start off the execution with the edges first. And so since our edge memorization, it starts with an O, which is right here. And so we need to set that up to our target position for edges, which is right here. Because remember, our buffer, which is like a bow, can only shoot to right here, our target position. So we need to set up our target to up at the target position. So in order to set up O to up here, it's a little bit of a tricky one actually, but the best way to do it is by doing a D prime, which brings it to here, and then a wide L, which puts it to back here, and then a D, which brings it to here, and then an L2, which brings it to here. So it's a bit brutal, and I'll just show you that one more time. In order to get O to up here, you go D prime to here, and then a fat L like that to bring it to here, and then a D to bring it around to here, and then an L2 to bring it up to the target position. And then we do the swapping algorithm, which for edges was the T-perm. So we just go ahead and do that. And then we need to undo the setup moves that we did. So doing that would be an L2 to bring it back down to here, and then a D prime to bring it back around to the back here, and then a fat L prime to bring it back to the front here, and then a D to bring it back to where it goes. And that solved that edge, which was our first target. So next, our next target, or our next letter, is going to be right here, which is I. And how we're going to set this up to our target position, it's again not a very nice one. And remember that we can't disrupt these three pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a fat L like that to bring it to the bottom here. And then we're going to do a D prime to bring it around to the side here. and then we're going to do an L2 to bring it up to the top here. And that's our target position. So now we can shoot the bow over to our target with that swapping algorithm, the TPEM. And now we have to undo the setup moves, which is an L2 to bring it back down to the bottom here, a D to bring it to the bottom here, and then that fat L prime back up there. And that solved I. And now our next letter is going to be W, and that is back down here. And so how we're going to set that up to our target position is a D move to bring it over to the side here, and then an L2. So that set up the W into our target position. So now we can swap our buffer with it, with that TPEM. And then we undo the setup moves that we just did, just like before. So we do an L2 to bring it back to the bottom here, and then a D prime, and that solved W. And then next we have L, and so that is right here. And this one is quite an easy setup. We can just do an L prime, and that puts that in the target position for us to do the swapping algorithm, the TPEM. And then since we did an L prime, now we need to do an L, and that solves the edge for L. And so we're coming to the end now, but for now we still have N, which is right here. And how we're going to set that up to our target position is we're going to do a wide D, and what that does is it brings N to back here, right here. So now we can do an L move, and that brings that to our target position without disrupting these three pieces. And so now we can do our swapping algorithm like this, and then we undo the setup moves that we did. So since we did D and then an L, now we can do an L prime and a D prime, or wide D prime, just like that. So next in our memorization is now we have Q right here. And this is another not very nice case. So what we're going to do to set up Q to our target position is we're going to do a fat L prime, and that brings it to right here. And then we're going to do a D move to bring it to the side here. And then we're going to do an L2. And that didn't disrupt these three pieces, and it set it up to our target position right here. So now we're going to do that TPEM to do the swap. And then we're going to undo the moves that we just did. So L2 to bring it to back here, and then a D prime to put it to the back here, and then a wide L. And that solves Q. And so next we have the letter G, which is right here. And this one is a little bit difficult without disrupting these three pieces, because you might be tempted to just do like an S move like that, which would set that up to our target position, but it would affect one of these three pieces if we did that. And so we can't do that. And so what we have to do instead is we can do an L, which brings it to back here, and then we can do sort of a wide D like that, and that brings it to here, and then an L prime. And that didn't disrupt these three pieces, and it set it up to our target position right here. So now we can do the swapping algorithm, and then we can undo the setup moves that we did. So L, fat D prime, and L prime, and that solved G. And now next up we have R, and so that's actually break into our edge flip, but we don't need to worry about that for execution. We can just follow the letters that we memorized. So an R, and how we can set that up to our target location is just doing an L like that. And then we can do the TPEM to swap them, and then we can undo the L that we did with an L prime. And then finally, last up, as a single letter on its own, which is important in a second, then we have H, and that's right here. And how we can set that up to our target position that's up here is we can do a wide D and then an L prime. And so that brings it up to here. So now we can shoot the bow or do the swapping algorithm. We've done that quite a lot now. And then we can do L and fat D prime, which undoes the setup. And there you go, that was the edges. But remember how we had that H that was on its own at the end? Well, that means that we have parity. So now, after doing the edges, we have to perform the parity algorithm, which was that third algorithm that we learnt, the RPERM. So if we go ahead and do that algorithm, remembering the U prime at the end, very important, then we've fixed up the parity, and now we can just go on with executing our corners. So just a quick reminder before we get into corners is that our target location that we need to set up the letters to, our targets, is right here. So we need to set up all of the letters that we have to this place right here. So the first letter of our corner memorization was B. And so how we can set that up to our target location here is an R, which brings it to back here, and then a D prime, and that brings it to right here. And so now we can perform the swapping algorithm, which is that modified Y perm from earlier. And then we can undo the setup moves. So since we did R, D prime, we can now do D and R prime. And so that solved B. And the next thing in the memorization was F. So we need to set up F right here to our target location right here. And how we're going to do that without affecting these three pieces, remember, is going to be F2. And then we can do that modified Y perm, the swapping algorithm, to shoot the bow down to the target location here. And then the reverse of F2 is just another F2. And that solved F. And now this is a cycle break, but because we're in execution, we don't really need to worry about the fact that it's a cycle break for now. We can just focus on doing the letters. And the letter that we memorized was C, which is right here. And so we can set up C to our target location, which is right here, by doing an F move like that. Easy as. And then we can do our swapping algorithm. And then we can undo that F with an F prime to bring it back up here. And next in our memorization was the letter X, which is right here. And so how we can set that up to our target location right here, it's a little bit of a trickier one, but what we can do is we can do a D move to bring it to right here, and then we can do an F prime move to bring it to right here. So I'll just show that one more time because it's a little bit tricky. To do X, we can bring it around to here with a D, and then we can do an F prime, and that brings it to the target location right here. And then we can do the swapping algorithm, and then we can undo the setup moves we did, which since we did D and then F prime, would now be F and D prime. And then finally, the last letter that we have for corners is going to be J right here. And how we can set that up to our target location right here is we can do F2, and that brings it around F2, and that brings it to right here. And then we can do a D, which puts it to our target location. And then we can do the swapping algorithm. And then in order to undo the F2 D, we can do D prime F2. And that solved the cube. Alright, so now that we've done that, which is very, very cool, I reckon you're ready to give the full execution a go by yourself, with your eyes open. Again, I'll give you the memorization, and you just have to, with your eyes open, execute the edges, and then the parity if it's needed, and then corners. So good luck! And now you know everything you need to know to actually solve the cube blindfolded. But in part 4, I will help you out with this a bit further by doing a full example solve, giving you stepping stones to a full solve, and I'll give you a bunch of tips to get you going. If you're going to attempt to solve the cube blindfolded now, then good luck, and if not, then I'll see you in part 4. See ya!